And welcome, students, to our continuing unit on the internet. We're going to now dive into what is a browser. So let's go ahead and get right into things. When we talk about browser, we're talking about a piece of software that allows the user to access information on the World Wide Web. Pretty simple, right? So when we start talking about browsers, obviously there's different components of things that load into a web page. You have web pages themselves, you have images, you have video, and these are all identified by pretty much a distinct URL, which the URL, if you don't know, is pretty much the address of where that file is located. And this enables browsers in order to retrieve and display that information on the user's device. Now, a key thing to note, in case you get confused, a web browser is not a search engine. There might be search engine capabilities built into the web browser. It's like example Chrome. You can type right in the URL field and hit enter to search. That's one example. But the web browser itself is not a search engine. It's using a search engine to search, but the search engine is something totally different. Now let's start off by examining a few of the more common web browsers. All right, now we have to talk about Internet Explorer still because it's still relevant. Because there's people that use it for things like testing and some legacy products that out that require Internet Explorer. So Internet Explorer still exists today. Now, if you recall, it was introduced by Microsoft as a counter to Netscape's Navigator all the way back in 1995. And it has a very long history of being bundled with Windows software. Obviously, not. It still is there today, but it's not really kind of how Microsoft is pushing. And part of the issues with Internet Explorer is that they've been long plagued with security issues. Pretty much after they destroyed Netscape and they became the dominant force in the internet, they really were the kind of powers that be. But people, because it's the biggest market share now, are going to target that for security exploits. So Microsoft held that market share up until the release of Safari in 2003. When Safari came out, because at this point, I'll talk about this in a minute, Microsoft actually had Internet Explorer on both Windows and Macs. And when Safari came out, it was no longer on Macs. So it eliminated overnight a big market share that Windows had. And additionally, with the release of other browsers, the market share of Internet Explorer has declined. It's only about a 3% market share today, which is still pretty significant if you think about a browser that's been around since 1995. Obviously there's different versions of it. It's not the same software. It's been updated numerously, and it's not really supported as much anymore. But it's still around for 3% of that market share. Now, the reason why I say it's still kind of supported is because Microsoft only gives security updates for Internet Explorer in place of their new browser, Edge. And they officially only support versions of Internet Explorer 11. Anything older than that, they don't officially support. And Internet Explorer 11 is going to phase out kind of with Windows 10 when that's scheduled to go back out in like 2025. So you got a couple years yet of Internet Explorer hanging around before it kind of goes the way of the dinosaur. Now, Edge, of course, is the new browser that Microsoft is pushing. The interesting thing about it, though, is like during development, they called it Project Spartan. Right? They didn't call Edge, that wasn't the official name of it yet. Instead, they just called it Project Spartan. Now, many who are unaware of Edge being the name of the browser is they will call it Internet Explorer because it looks a lot like Internet Explorer's icon. Like you look at this E, and I flip back here, and you look at this E, it's easy to see kind of why people might get confused between the two. Now, of course, the browser, as we mentioned, is a replacement to Internet Explorer. It is very streamlined in comparison to Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer is a terribly clunky product. Edge also has full HTML5 support. And they include features such as reading view and also web nodes, which are actually pretty cool features. However, Edge has a lot of other issues, such as it still feels clunky and slow compared to other browsers. It may be not as responsive. I've run into that issue myself. Additionally, when the browser came out, there wasn't support for things like add-ons and stuff like that right away, and so that actually hurt the browser upon launch, because without the ability for people to start developing different extensions and add-ons and stuff like that, well, they didn't have the tools for it, they didn't have the resources for it, and so they quickly just went back to what they were using. Right. Now the adoption of Edge has been slow. When it first came out, there was a 20% usage rate of it. People were very excited. It's like, oh, it's something new, something shiny, got to try it out. But it didn't really work out as well as Microsoft was hoping, and people quickly switched back to other browsers, such as Google Chrome, and so now it's down to a current, like about 2% of the market, which is really funny if you think about it, that it's only at a 2% market share when Internet Explorer, the older version of this browser, the outdated version won't be supported anymore, is at 3% market share. So Edge has a lot to do to kind of get good karma back in the community. All right, let's next talk about FireFox. And if you remember, FireFox has kind of an interesting history. It was, part of the source code for FireFox came from Netscape Communicator. So it's kind of like the continuation of that browser. Now, with Firefox itself, it was a free and open source browser developed back in 2002 by the Mozilla Foundation. And when I say it's open source, it means that you can go and you can edit your code, really. It's a big community project. They work on it. Now, when Firefox was in development, it was originally codenamed Phoenix, because rising from the ashes. Well, it makes sense if it came from Communicator, because they're going to rise again. Of course, it was the Mozilla Foundation obviously is not Netscape in any way, shape, or form. They weren't AOL. They're their own independent nonprofit org. Before they renamed the product to Firebird, because it's a little more generic than Phoenix, and eventually settling on Firefox. Now, Firefox rose to popularity sometime about the early 2000s, because obviously 2002 is about when it came out. 2003 is when Safari came out. About mid-2000s, around 2005, is kind of like when it started peaking in its popularity. And part of this is that the reason why Firefox got to be so popular is that it was regarded as much more secure than, let's say, Internet Explorer, which was the other major browser at the time. And part of the reason for that was there was a lot quicker fix time for bugs and code issues versus that of Internet Explorer. A issue that might have taken 200 days to fix in Internet Explorer maybe only took like 10 days to fix in Firefox. That's a pretty significant difference, even though it might be the exact same exploit, that's coming through the pipe to prevent a piece of malware from running. Firefox was more responsive and quicker on it. Now, as I already mentioned, Firefox would kind of remain popular up until the release of Chrome. Obviously, Chrome is the most popular web browser, and we'll get there in just a second. Now, Firefox is not gone, but its market share, which used to be pretty significant, has diminished a little bit. They're still hanging on there pretty well. It's about 5% of the current market. All right, let's take a segue here before we get to Chrome. We're going to talk about Safari. This is Apple's browser right here. All right, it's the default browser on all Apple devices, whether you have a MacBook, a MacBook Pro, a Mac, an iPad, an iPhone. Safari is the default browser, so you want to open the internet, you use Safari. Now, Mac computers had previously originally used Netscape Navigator, and even Internet Explorer prior to Steve Jobs announcing this browser. As I kind of had mentioned on the Internet Explorer page, Internet Explorer was everywhere, and then of course Apple's like, hey, here's our browser, we're switching over effectively, like right away. Now, Safari is not a perfect web browser by any means, even though it's made by Apple, and it was very quick to adopt HTML5 standards. It's been criticized because it doesn't really keep up with those things. Other web browsers are keeping up with the newer innovations and stuff like that that keep coming out for the different web standards, and Safari is kind of lagging behind in those. You also have things such as features for third-party web browsers on Apple devices. Well, they still, in order for them to run, they have to change their internal engine components to meet whatever Apple's requirements. Like Apple has a special kit they want you to use, so you got to use that kit to build your web page around. So they're not quite the same browser as they would be otherwise. Now, Safari in the overall market holds about a 14% market share. And it's very important to note that this is, when we talk about these market shares, that they're overall. If we look at the market share for Safari on a mobile device, it's a lot larger because there's a lot more mobile devices. Most mobile devices, obviously, are probably going to be Android or iPhone. And so, naturally, a lot of people are going to run probably on an Android, probably Chrome. And there is Chrome for iOS, but a lot of people would just use default browser to go off and install a new one. So it is a lot more significant when you start looking at mobile devices. All right, time for the show, Chrome. All right, this came out in 2008 by Google. It's the third most popular web browser and dominates with 59% of the market. So almost 60% of the market. That would be 3/5 is Google Chrome. So every 3 out of 5 browsers is Google Chrome. Just think about that for a minute. That means if you have a group of 5 people, 3 of them are using Google Chrome. Now, part of Chrome's code is released on an open source project known as Chromium. Chromium is very similar to Chrome, but doesn't have all the bells and whistles. It also, give you actually look at what Chromium looks like. It's a different color web browser. Like this icon here is the same, but instead of being the distinct red, green, yellow, and blue colors that you see on the Google icon for everything, it's simply just like this matte blue. It's just one, like different tones of blue, but it's all blue because it's the Chromium web browser. Now, due to Chrome's massive success, Google has expanded the Chrome name to other projects such as Chrome Bits, Chromecast, Chromebooks, and much, much more. They're like, hey, this is a really popular product. We should capitalize on it, and they have. All right, now there's one more web browser I want to talk about, which may not be that significant to the impact of it, but it does have a lot of historical significance, and that's Opera. This is a web browser developed by Opera Software back in 1994. And the reason why I want to stop and talk about Opera is that many of the features that originated in Opera were later adopted by other web browsers. Opera may not be the first one necessarily, but they were kind of the first one to popularize, like, hey, this is a cool feature, let's use this. And other web browsers kind of looked at what Opera was doing and said, we're going to bring that in there. And even though Opera may not have had the biggest market share at the time, people looked at that and said, this is really cool. So that's where that came from. So things such as private browsing, which, if you're not familiar with private browsing, that's like an incognito session in Chrome. Pretty much it doesn't let your computer store cookies and stuff like that. Doesn't mean people still can't record like where you're going and stuff like that. You'd have to get start using VPNs and stuff like that. But it's to keep cookies from being downloaded on your computer. You have tab browsing. Like back before tab browsing was a thing, if you wanted to open up another tab, well, you couldn't. You had to open up a whole new window. And opening up a whole new window pretty much has to start a whole new instance of that application. Whereas opening another tab is just within that application. So it's a little bit more resource friendly. Then you also have pop-up blocking. Back in the old days, it was really annoying because you go to a website and the pop-up would pop right up in front of your face and you'd be like, I got to click off this. Well, pop-up blocking would be things that would be by default. It would just say the website goes to open up a pop-up. The browser attempts to block it because obviously you have your settings say, I don't want that to pop up in my face. And additionally, support for CSS. When HTML first came out, it was not really designed to stylize content in the web. CSS is really the thing that helps stylize the content, add things like color, different layout options, using different div tags and classes and stuff like that. CSS is pretty powerful. And Opera was kind of one of the first ones to really help bring that mainstream. Now, Opera, for as much back and forth that it has, it still retains about a 4% market share, which, if you look at that, is more than Internet Explorer and it's more than Edge. In fact, it's if it had a little bit more, it could be as much as both of them combined, but it's only about a 4% market share. All right, now we looked at those different browsers. Let's examine just some common features that are in the modern day web browser. We're not looking at like the old ones, like the original very first browser, which was called World Wide Web, or we're not looking at Mosaic, which is the first graphical browser, or Netscape, or anything like that. We're going to look at the modern web browser. If you go off and download a browser right now, what are some of those things that would be in it? Well, modern web browsers support the latest standards of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and multimedia. They're always trying to update to stay with these current standards because there's things that are changing. Current version of HTML5 is out there, and it has a lot of different supports. Before HTML5 came out, they're using HTML4, and HTML4 didn't have a lot of things that HTML5 can do. HTML5, for example, has better support for multimedia. Now, the purpose of a web browser is to fetch information and display them on a user's device. That kind of goes back to our definition. Now, the process of how this works pretty much starts when the user types a URL into the browser. Let's say I decided to go to my website, Math&Comps.com. So I type that in there and I hit enter. That's you sending information to the web browser says, I want to go to that website. Now, virtually all URLs on the website, or excuse me, on the web, will start either with HTTP or HTTPS. There might be exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking, they're all going to start with either HTTP or HTTPS. They don't necessarily have to have www in front of them. Not every website has www in front of it, but pretty much almost all of them have HTTP or HTTPS. And the thing you need to remember is that HTTPS, communication between the web browser and the server you're trying to connect to, is encrypted. HTTP is not connected. It pretty much says, I want this, and it pulls it. And if anyone wants to look at that information transmitting through HTTP, they can see it. HTTPS, it's encrypted. Now, once a web page has been retrieved, the browser's rendering engine will display it on the user's device, which also includes things such as image, video, pretty much any other rendering things that's supported by the browser. Obviously, if you're looking at a desktop browser versus a mobile browser, they behave slightly differently. A mobile browser tends to try and, if it can, run a web page in its mobile optimized form because you have a much smaller screen. So a mobile optimized web page is going to look a lot nicer. Now, web pages usually also contain hyperlinks to other pages and resources. So you'll have links that will either go to different places within the website, or they may be places outside the website. Now, each of these links contains another URL, and when you click that URL, the browser navigates to a new resource. Obviously, you probably already know this because you've undoubtedly navigated numerous millions probably of web pages. Different things you've clicked on, even like going to, for example, to YouTube and hitting the next video that you want to watch. It has a link ultimately behind it, and it's sending you to that link of that next YouTube video. Now, all major web browsers typically allow the user to open multiple pages at the same time. Either whether it's in a different browser windows, you still can do it, even though tabs are a thing. You can also still open in a new window, which can sometimes come in handy. I've done that before. Like for example, I'll be in Chrome. I want to work side by side with two different documents in Chrome. Well, I can grab the one Chrome tab, pull it out, release it, make a new browser window, and then I can split screen it. Now, boundary browsers also support the use of extensions to either add to or modify browser operation in a variety of ways. Whether it's just using something like a theme to change the skin layout of your web browser, or using like an add-on that adds functionality, or for example, it might be something like an ad blocker because you want to block ads and malicious drive-by downloads. Now, there are some obviously common user interface items that feature in browsers. First, of course, is the back and forward buttons, which take the user back to page visitor forward to the next one. Sometimes you might just see like a one way or the other. You also have a refresh button to reload the current page. You'll have a stop button to cancel loading the page, which sometimes is merged with the refresh. For example, in Chrome, if you go to a web page, when it starts to load up and the page is loading, you'll see that the icon changes from the refresh arrow to a little X. That's your stop button right there. A home button to return the user to their home page, whatever that's set to, which may be set to hidden by default. Like for example, in Chrome, you can still set a home tab, but the button may not be there. You can turn it on though. An address bar to input the URL of a page and then display it. So that's just where you're typing in www.mathandcomps.com. That's just where that address goes. And of course, the search bar to input terms to a search engine, which is sometimes merged with the address bar. This is a bigger thing for an older web browser because nowadays everybody's like, hey, just put it right into the address bar. It'll do the searching for you. Like Edge, for example, is powered by Bing. Chrome is powered by Google. You just type it right in there and it'll search for you. So if I don't want to go to a website, I just want to search up a term, I can just type the term in there, enter, and it'll bring back search results. And that's going to wrap it up for today, folks. So until next time.